I don't think it's any secret that Adam Silver is slowly working on molding the NBA to be a little bit different and look a little bit different than it does right now. You can see that with the new play-in tournament, which I'm a big fan of, or the fact that he's proposed a mid-season tournament, kind of like how soccer has. But it doesn't stop with just him trying to add new things to the NBA. There's also some pretty major problems with the NBA that I think the league and Adam Silver has hinted at trying to solve recently. So today, I wanted to talk about 3 of those problems, why they're so bad, and what possible solutions might look at. And I'm going to get right into it. Problem number 1 is end-of-game fouling. You may be so used to this that you don't even really recognize how bad it is or how much it sucks, but towards the end of games, typically in close games, it ends with the team that's down fouling, hoping for missed free throws, and then trying to run down and shoot real quick, and then another foul. It can take close, good games and drag out the ending and make them super anticlimactic. And while this is the strategically correct thing to do, I'm not doubting that, the idea of having something be a foul is that you're trying to prevent teams from doing it. So having situations, particularly when that situation is the end of close games, being bogged down by teams strategically fouling a bunch, it's not a good thing. Slows down the game and ruins what should be the best part of basketball. And of the 3 things that I'm going to talk about today, I think this is the problem that the NBA is being the most proactive about because it's kind of the easiest to solve. The solution that it seems like the NBA is heading towards is the Elam ending. Now, if you don't know what the Elam ending is, you probably haven't watched the All-Star game. Basically, what the Elam ending is instead of having a timed fourth quarter, you have a point total that the teams have to get to, and they just play until one of them gets there. The way that they've been working it in the All-Star game is they add 24 points to the team that has the highest score at that time. So let's say a game was 100-90 after the third quarter. They would say whoever gets to 124 then wins the game. Now this does 2 things. Number 1, it takes away all incentive to foul at the end of games, because instead of running out of time and needing to try to save it by immediately ending a team's possession by sending them to the free throw line, that just doesn't exist anymore. There's no time to save. You're just trying to play serious defense, and once the other team scores X amount, the game is over. The other thing is that it would cause every game to end on a game-winning shot. Now, of course, it could be a free throw, which would be anticlimactic, but a lot of games would end on one big shot. Not only has the NBA tried this out in the All-Star game, but they've also tried it out in the G League. I believe the G League playoffs are going to this year feature the Elam ending. Now, me personally, I'm a big fan of this. I think the All-Star games have been fantastic, largely because of that rule change, and most people, when watching that game, seem to agree. But the vast majority of NBA fans right now are not a fan of it. I ran a poll on whether or not people would be in favor of the NBA switching over to this game ending, and I think only about 15% of people said yes, and 85% said no. And that's on a relatively decent 7,000 person sample size. And I think a lot of that is because the Elam ending is not perfect. While it does add game-ending shots every single time, it does take away overtime. There's no way to go to overtime because you can't have both the teams be tied at that point total. The game just point blank ends. And then also it takes away the ability to have a game end on a fourth quarter buzzer beater. There's no buzzer anymore because there's no timed fourth quarter. I would also, if I could throw a third thing in there, I would wonder if it kind of messes with the all-time stats. NBA all-time stats are super important to people. I really like that the NBA kind of has the all-time stats continuity because there wasn't any season where people are playing less or more games. Like in the NFL, for example, they've added so many games that now the single season records are becoming easier and easier to break. NBA doesn't have that problem. They've always had the same number of games, at least in the regular season. But by changing how the fourth quarter works, now all of a sudden the idea of like putting up a huge fourth quarter and having maybe like an 80-point game becomes that much harder. So that could be another disadvantage, but I think ultimately what the Elam adds, which is more exciting endings, and you still have game winners in place of buzzer beaters, and now it's every single night. Personally, I favor that over the ability to have overtime and the ability to have a buzzer beater in the fourth quarter, which honestly is relatively rare. Now, the NBA's plan for implementing this seems to be to ease it in. They're going to have the All-Star game be like that. They're going to have the G League be like that. And people don't really care that much about those. And people don't really have strong opinions about either of those, so it's totally fine. But the problem is that eventually you have to make that leap. Eventually it has to be the real NBA games are going to be Elam endings. And right now I kind of believe that that's a pretty long way away. Maybe there's some ways where they could say, we're just going to have the play-in tournament be Elam ending. That could possibly work. We're just going to have the mid-season tournament, if we add that, be an Elam ending. That could work as well. But I think just totally changing the end of basketball games is a pretty steep task. There's also another proposed solution that could possibly work. At the end of games, you could just have refs call out which fouls are intentional fouls, and while maybe there's no set hard guideline on that, the NBA rules rarely follow the set hard guideline. Reffing is often more fluid than people think. For instance, the NBA could say, in the last 2 minutes of the game, if you intentionally foul somebody, the team that gets fouled is not only going to get 2 shots, or maybe even just 1 shot, but they're also going to get the ball back. And that takes away all of the advantage of intentionally fouling, because the point is to end the team with the ball's possession as quickly as possible to save time. Now, if that team still gets the ball, there's no advantage to that. You don't end the possession. There are a few questions I have about this as well. If you made it 1 shot and the ball back, but you had to inbound the ball, I think there would still be some situations where teams would say, well, there's only 15 seconds left in the game. If we just let them dribble it out, we're not going to get the ball back at all. So screw it. We'll give them 1 shot and then just try to get a steal on the inbound. But they could also just have the teams check it up, I guess, although that's not something that's ever used in the NBA. So I do think that's pretty easily solved. That rule change would be a lot less dramatic and change a lot less about the NBA. And I wouldn't hate it if they did that either. I mean, I'll take either of these solutions. Personally, again, I'm on the Elam ending side, and I think that's the direction that the NBA wants to head. But I think the 2 shots and ball back is just a lot less change. I don't think a lot of fans like change, and that's not necessarily wrong. You don't have to like the Elam ending, but I think you could implement it right now, and the majority of NBA fans, I think, would like it. However, maybe people could argue that fouling at the end of games and that strategy keeps teams in games that otherwise would not be. Overall, to me, though, I think it really just bogs down the game too much. Problem number 2 is tanking, and we've seen the NBA already take big steps in trying to solve this by flattening the odds. Now, instead of having a 25% chance to get the number 1 overall pick if you were the worst team, the top 3 teams just have 14%. And we've already seen the NBA try to solve this by flattening the lottery odds. It used to be, if you remember, that if you were the worst team, you had a 25% chance to get the number 1 overall pick, which really was not that awesome, but it's a lot better than it is now because the top 3 teams just have an equal 14% chance of getting that top spot. And they've also added the number 4 overall pick into that lottery system as well, where it used to just be that the top 3 slots were the ones that were decided based on the lottery. But with tanking, I almost wonder if it's actually as bad as people make it out to be. Sure, you don't want teams intentionally trying to lose games, and there's a limit to everything. If you just let teams tank as much as they want, I'm sure you would get some really, really horrifying basketball. If you look at the current tanking teams, the Pistons, the Rockets, the Spurs, those fan bases know that you're not going to be able to be competitive forever, and that at some point you have to pick high in the draft to get some of the top players so you can contend again, right? So going into a season knowing, hey, we're not going to make the playoffs this year, but we get to see all of the young guys play a ton and we get to have a lot of hope for the future, that's not always the worst thing. Now, maybe from a TV perspective, from a tickets perspective, that doesn't work out that way, but I know that Oklahoma City Thunder fans have not had a bad time while the team is stocking up draft picks and developing young players. In fact, I would argue that that's more exciting than sneaking into the play-in tournament, being the 10 seed, losing, and then not getting a high pick because of it. I also maybe question how much flattening the odds really helps. On the one hand, not having an advantage between being the worst team and the 3rd worst teams kind of mitigates that race to the bottom. You can win 5-6 more games than another team and you can still have the exact same odds, meaning that it's not a competition to actually be the worst team, right? Like, look at this year, for example. You've got the Hornets, the Spurs, the Rockets, and the Pistons, all very close to each other. And none of those 3 teams are like, we must be the worst out of those 4. They're like, we don't want to be the best out of those 4. And even if we are, our odds only drop down to 12.5% for the number 1 overall, which is not that bad. However, on the other hand, you can flatten the odds as much as you want. Unless you make every pick totally even if you're not in the playoffs and you have the same odds of getting the number 1 overall if you're the 14th worst team versus the worst team, it's still going to be advantageous to be bad on purpose. The way that the NBA works is that oftentimes it comes down to how good your best player is, and the gap between having the 5th pick and the number 1 overall pick is oftentimes unbelievably big. Like, for example, this year with Victor Wembanyama. And this is a great draft class, but Wembanyama is built as a guy who could be an all-time great. And if you look back on teams that win the finals, typically I think about 80% of the time since 1970, they have a player on that team that you would consider to be top 15 or so all time. You look at the NFL, and it's true that teams still tank there, but you don't feel like you're not going to be able to get a superstar quarterback if you're picking at 10, and maybe the same way that you would in the NBA, although obviously we've seen guys like Giannis and Kawhi become superstars without being one of those top picks. But the odds discrepancy is much bigger versus the number 1 and the number 10 pick in the NBA compared to what it is in the NFL. So I kind of think that tanking is just not something you can get rid of, because that's just how basketball works. It's just how the NBA works. You're oftentimes only as good as your best player, and I think the gap is always going to be big with prospects like that. Plus, it's also hard to imagine a world with zero tanking would look like. I know as a Hornets fan, I wouldn't feel any better if the Hornets had no advantage from being this bad this year. In fact, I'm more excited that the Hornets are finally actually legitimately bad and going to have top lottery odds. For so long, I've suffered with a team that's just barely competitive enough not to be in the playoffs or to win anything, but too competitive to actually go and get one of the top picks. So would you enjoy it if your 15-win team was also still trying to win games? I don't think I would. But I think the NBA's solution to tanking, honestly, is pretty simple. Right now, nobody is tanking to an egregious amount. And typically, tanking doesn't come in the form of, we are going to intentionally try to lose games, and more so of, we're far away from winning a title. So instead of asking the guys to go out there and go lose, go miss shots, you're saying, we're going to position our team in the offseason to have a bunch of young players. We're going to give them a bunch of run to develop them. And ultimately, that will likely result in us losing a lot of games and being able to add even more young talent. If somebody does something egregious like the process Sixers, which maybe shouldn't have even been punished, but if somebody goes to the extent where they're being incredibly horrible on purpose and making moves that don't make any sense for the sake of being bad, which again, I'm not sure that you really need to do now that the top 3 spots have the same odds for the number 1 overall, then instead of trying to change how the lottery works to prevent that, you can just punish them directly. The NBA is allowed to make subjective calls on that. And while, yeah, some teams might say it's not fair if it happens to them, I think you'd have to be pretty egregious at this point to actually get fined for that. It's only happened one other time, again, to the process 76ers. So I would say tanking is a problem that gets talked about a lot, but I don't even know if it's that big of a problem at the moment. And in a year where maybe we expected to see the most tanking ever, I'm not seeing anything really, truly horribly bad. The Rockets are trying to win games. The Hornets went into the season trying to win games. Many people preseason had the Pistons in the play-ins, obviously, before Cade Cunningham got hurt. So maybe this shouldn't have been included as a top 3 problem in the NBA, but it's one of the bigger problems that's talked about in the NBA. But I think the solution is you let teams do what they're doing now, and if it becomes worse in the future, you handle that on a case-by-case basis, to the point where if a team goes too far, you just punish them, and all of a sudden, it's not beneficial to take it too far anymore. Our third problem is player injury. Obviously, injuries have always been a thing, right? But recently it's gone from the point of you have some odd injuries every year to now it feels like almost nobody can actually get through 82 games. For instance, in the 1980-81 season, 57 players played at least 82 games, and 2 of them played 84 because of injury. Last year, only 5 players played all 82 games. And at first glance, you might expect the opposite to happen. I mean, medical technology and recovery process has only gotten significantly better in the last 40 years, right? So why are players missing all of these games? Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one is that teams eventually just decided that playing all 82 games, particularly if you're a contending team, is not something that really makes all that sense. Winning in the regular season is far less important than being healthy for the playoffs. And in fact, any given season, you can go back and look on the playoffs, and typically the team that wins it all is just whichever top tier contender ends up being the healthiest at the right time. Most seasons, you can point to a certain series where the champion barely won, but the other team had a large injury, and it's like, oh man, if they had been healthy, they probably would have won it all. And teams recognize this, and they've decided, okay, well, what if my guy played 75 games and avoided back-to-backs? That's probably more beneficial for his health and probably more beneficial for our title odds entirely. The other problem is that a more athletic, more spaced out NBA also probably leads to more injuries. Think about it, if you're a defensive player, go watch defense from the 80s and go watch defense now. You're asking defensive players to move a lot more and to handle a lot more athletic players. That is tougher on the body and ultimately leads to players' bodies breaking down quicker. And while some people might tell you that it's actually just because this generation of players are all big babies, I have a hard time believing that. Although it may be true that teams just don't want to risk injuries because, again, they've decided that it's much more beneficial to have a guy miss a few games in the regular season if he's kind of 50-50 to go, and they're better off just benching them entirely if they are, a game time decision. But overall, I think the league has just gotten tougher on players' bodies, and I think load management is here to stay. And it's almost changed how you look at an injury-prone player entirely. Think about, again, the NFL. If a guy is injury-prone, you're not necessarily banking on him getting hurt. You're saying, okay, we're rolling the dice with him, right? Like Christian McCaffrey, for example, hurt the last 2 years, had the injury-prone label, but you roll the dice if you're San Francisco, and he stayed healthy all year. But in the NBA, if you have a guy like Gordon Hayward, for example, it's not a question about whether or not he's going to get hurt. He is, and I'm not trying to single him out. That's true for every injury-prone player. They're not going to make it through 82 games, and you almost have to assume that that player is going to miss valuable time, possibly the playoffs. Now, there are some solutions to this problem, like, for instance, extending the NBA regular season a few weeks so that you can eliminate back-to-backs. That'd be a good one. Or you could possibly just shorten the NBA season altogether, which I think the NBA may want to do from a player injury perspective, but ultimately that would make them less money, and they're not going to do that. But I think overall it's a tough problem to solve because even if you take away back-to-backs entirely, are teams going to stop load managing? Probably not, because again, each individual regular season game is not that important in the grand scheme of things. Again, particularly for contending teams. So it's still the correct play to rest them at certain times and give them extended breaks throughout the regular season. And while maybe you could shorten the NBA regular season so much that each individual regular season game does matter, even for a contending team, the amount that you would have to do it would be ridiculous, and I just don't think that's even close to logistically possible. There's also some talks of possibly expanding the roster so teams have more depth to go to, but I don't think there's any team that actually uses all the depth they already have. And if they are reaching to their 18th best player, that's probably a game that they're already punting on. So me personally, I would recommend eliminating back-to-backs. I know the NBA has been working towards that, and I do think we're eventually going to get there. But outside of that, man, I think load management is here to stay, and I think players being more injury-prone is something that's going to be incredibly common for a long time. So that about does it for me. It's gotten dark out, so now my lighting is all messed up and I'm all washed out. But thank you guys for sticking all the way through the video. Make sure to go check out the podcast. You can do it on this channel, or you can look it up on Spotify and Apple. Anywhere you get your podcasts, it'll be there. Also, go check out any other videos on this channel. Like, comment, subscribe, all the stuff you're supposed to do on YouTube videos, and I'll catch you guys next time.